I'm joined here with Sam Tarry. He's the MP for Ilford South, and also he's the Vice Chair of Labour Friends of Kashmir. I understand he's recently visited Pakistan and Azad Kashmir with a delegation of members of Parliament here in the UK. So we just want to get his insight onto that. So first I'd like to ask you, what was the purpose of the visit to Pakistan? If you give some of your views regards to that.
So I've campaigned on the issue of Kashmir for almost, well, since I've become an MP, and even before that. It's an issue that's very important to people in Ilford South. And so for me, it was a fact-finding mission to understand more deeply the plight and the suffering of the people of Kashmir, to understand what the Azad Jammu Kashmir government are doing, and really to understand not just the history, but actually how we can move that whole process forward to actually allow the people of Kashmir, who have suffered for more than 70 years, to actually have a plebiscite to decide their own democratic future, whether that be as an independent state, whether that be with India or with Pakistan. That is, of course, their choice to make. But at the moment, that process has been stalled for a long period of time. At the same time, you know, what's going on in Indian-occupied Jammu Kashmir is a displacement of people internally. So we met thousands of refugees that are now over the border into the Pakistan AJK. And also the fact that, you know, the Indian government has to deploy over 900,000 troops to pacify the population. Now, this clearly is not a sustainable position to be in, and I want to see the international law and the application of human rights applied to this situation, and to put pressure on the British government to be more active in pushing this forwards.
Could you clarify, in terms of the delegation that attended there, the visit, what they consisted of, the 12 people that came with you? Who were they, what their roles were? Could you explain that further?
So there were 3 members of Parliament, myself, then we had Naz Shah, who's MP in Bradford, and Andrew Gwynn, who is the MP in Manchester, Denton, Reddish. Andrew is the chair of Labour Friends of Kashmir. I'm the vice chair. Naz herself, obviously, is a daughter of Kashmir, her family heritage. You know, she lived in Kashmir, went to school in Kashmir for a period of time, I believe, somewhere not too far from Mirpur. So that was the core delegation. Then advisors, also Raja Najibut Hussain, who's obviously been awarded a medal by the Pakistan government for his efforts over many, many years in campaigning for the cause of the Kashmiri people, and then a series of staff and advisors who made up that wider delegation.
All right, thank you. So I just want to look on terms of a ground level when you did visit Kashmir. What your views were, you know, in terms of your point of view being there in person, as opposed to the reports that you've seen on the media and meetings in the UK. Could you give a comparison in terms of being in Kashmir? What was it like, the feeling at ground level? What did you bring from the experience? Could you give that knowledge to the viewers on that? Thank you.
So look, we visited not just the dignitaries and officials. We, of course, met the current president of Azad Jammu Kashmir and a number of government ministers that run the AJK government. But most importantly, we actually met families, people at the grassroots, people living in long-established and more recently established refugee camps, hearing their stories, the reasons as to why they were internally displaced, what happened to them and their families in Indian-occupied Jammu Kashmir, why they felt they had to escape to the other side of the line of control because of the suffering and abuse that their families had often had. You know, we met children who had been shot at by the Indian occupying army. These were, you know, really bringing home the reality of the brutality of the occupation. The fact that we met people who talked to us openly about the way that rape had been used as a weapon to try and subjugate, women in particular, and that thousands of political prisoners and freedom fighters, were currently still in jail. We met young people at the universities there as well, and we met a number of other institutions to learn about how civil society in AJK is trying to build itself to keep the cause alive, to actually build more links internationally, to educate people about the struggle and the suffering that's gone on for so long. So it was really about opening our eyes and be able to talk with authenticity about what's gone on, that it's not something that's just happening in a faraway land, it's something that we've seen with our own eyes. And then when we're calling for more action with the United Nations, more action with our own government to sort of move away from a policy of saying this is just a bilateral problem between India and Pakistan, I don't believe that. You know, I'm a British MP. Britain, you know, was obviously in charge of that entire part of the world in the 1940s. 1947 partition happens. This is one of the big messes that Britain actually left behind, one of the unresolved issues. And for nearly 70 years, the people of Kashmir, on whether it be in Azad Kashmir or whether it be across in Indian-occupied Kashmir, have been promised by the international community that they will be able to have a plebiscite to democratically choose their own future pathway. You know, and it's the human right of anybody to be able to choose who governs you and how they govern you. You know, that, as a Democrat, is something I believe very strongly, and I think that that is a model, you know, that I want to see in every part of the world. Now, if people choose a terrible government, that's their choice, but at least if they had the ability to choose that government. Right now what's going on is there is no democracy, is a military occupation, and people are continuing to suffer. 70 years on a weekly basis, families are still becoming internally displaced refugees, having to come from Indian-occupied Kashmir into Pakistan, into Azad Kashmir, to escape the suffering of them and their families and to protect their children and their women folk. And that is obviously clearly unacceptable. And one of the things I want to do is to be able to shine a spotlight onto this internationally, to say the international community cannot keep kicking this can down the road. It needs a focus, a concerted effort. It needs international partners. And actually, I believe that Britain has a historic duty, having been involved in creating the problem in the first place, actually to be part of a peaceful resolution to that. No, it's totally unacceptable. From my point of view, I see Kashmir very much in line with a number of other international issues that have been unresolved, where the international community says we won't do much about it because our interests are maybe having trade with a different superpower, and actually they're always trading away people's human rights. And actually, if we're going to have global justice and peace for humanity, we need to have a framework of international law and international human rights as a basis of that. And that is what needs to be applied. In fact, actually, if the UN resolutions were upheld that have already been passed in regard to Kashmir, then we would be already in a much better place. This means now, 70 years, you've had 2-3 generations of people who are living without real hope of freedom. And that is, of course, totally unacceptable. I see this cause in Kashmir very similarly to the plight of the Palestinian people, who are also, around 70 years without a solution and their own attempt to have real nationhood. So Yassin Malik, of course, I'm sure your viewers will know, is a phenomenal woman, a very powerful and passionate advocate. She, of course, has suffered herself almost as a political widow because her husband, Yassin Malik, is a political prisoner. And for people that don't know, Yassin Malik was a freedom fighter. He was involved in armed struggle, of course, against what he saw as the occupying forces. Now, leaving aside the rights or wrongs of that, he chose a path, as many did, like people like Nelson Mandela, for example, to say we will lay down arms and we'll take a democratic, peaceful pathway forwards to then get freedom. Yassin Malik has met 7 Pakistani presidents and prime ministers. He has flown internationally to the US. This is someone who is now languishing in an Indian jail with a trial that really didn't hold up any standards of international scrutiny, and potentially facing execution. And so that for me is totally unacceptable, because of course the will and the struggle of the Kashmir person is not just about one person, but clearly by containing him in jail, threatening to end his life is about trying to crush the hopes of freedom for the whole of the Kashmiri people. And that, of course, is very dangerous in a region that's already volatile. So Mushal Malik is working very hard to do a number of things. She has a program, a 100-day program, working with women in Kashmir to try and alleviate, sort of poverty and to make sure that women have access to education. In fact, we visited together and both spoke at one of the universities in Kashmir very powerfully about the opportunities that education has and how actually it's important that women are able to access that university level education as well. But also, most importantly, she of course wants to highlight and raise the plight of her husband, because it's not just his human rights that have been denied, it's the human rights of her daughter, who has not seen her father, and her as his wife, who has been unable to see her husband or even communicate with him. Now that is a terrible amount of mental torture and suffering that no one should have to deal with. And of course, internationally, human rights, mean that everyone has a right to a family life, and that is being denied to this family. And my view, very strongly, is that you need people like Yassin Malik as part of the peaceful, democratic solution. And actually, if India is serious about ever giving a democratic say to allow the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir to choose their own future, then of course he needs to be freed from jail and actually, have these trumped-up charges against him removed.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time, Sam, and best wishes for the future. Thank you.